Dan Rubenstein, let's talk transfer portal, shall we?
Are you replacing me? Is somebody transferring in?
I will neither confirm nor it's not Cannell. No, it's not Danny Cannell.
Fair enough.
But I will neither confirm nor deny whether there have been discussions behind the scenes on that front.
We're having Max Olson on the show. You're a huge portal guy. Not necessarily like if this is the best possible thing for the sport kind of guy. You are a portal guy in that you love a little bit, a touch, a splash of chaos in the offseason. Yes?
I adore the transfer portal.
Right.
And no, I don't think it's necessarily the best thing for the sport.
Right.
I'm not saying I'm a cheerleader for it, but yes, given what we do, given what I'm interested in, I prefer a little bit of intrigue here in the offseason, during the season in some cases. And I think it's been a real shot of life. It's given us something else to pay attention to. And
sure,
I'm a fan. I follow what Max says, Pete Nakos out at On 3. Like, there are a lot of really good people that are working this beat. And I am reading everything they have to say with regard to the portal.
Okay. What is your do you have a favorite part? Is it like the major player surprise? Is it a school all of a sudden finding $17.5 million in the couch cushions? Is it a roster being decimated because a coach left and you're like, oh my God, it's like an expansion draft in college football now that everybody is looking at Alabama players now that Nick Saban has left? Is it a juicy tampering story?
Yes.
What is it? Yes to all of the above?
Yes to all the above. I mean, obviously the surprise player.
Yeah.
The surprise player goes without saying. We have those every side. Carson Beck was, I think, both times a surprise player. That he would go into the draft with the injury that he sustained in the playoff, and then, or at the end of the season, excuse me. And then, of course, with his decision to kind of come out, pull his name from the draft, decide he's going to go to Miami, where he's obviously got some connections and get a ton of money.
Yeah.
We don't even know what he's going to look like throwing the football this year, but the surprise stories for sure are a big one for me. I am hopeful that at some point, I want to ask Max a couple questions about this. I'm hopeful that at some point we will start getting dumb money stories. I love a good dumb money story with respect to professional sports.
Yeah.
And teams just going out and offering crazy contracts for players that it doesn't seem are worthy of that dollar figure.
Right.
We haven't quite gotten there yet because a lot of this stuff happens behind the scenes, but I eagerly await the days when we find out, oh, so-and-so spent what on that player? Why would they do that? Yeah. Where was the return? What was their assumed return on investment there? I am eagerly awaiting stories like that, which I think will come to us in relatively short order here. I just love everything about it.
You watched a Notre Dame Penn State like roster and said, okay, this guy transferred in. I assume he's going to get some snaps at, right tackle or safety. And then a year or two later, you're like, he just never played.
No, Julian Fleming didn't play this year. Julian Fleming had a couple big catches and mostly was a blocker this year for Penn State. And he was one of the big gets last portal cycle. So yeah, I'm looking at this constantly and wondering, what is the hit rate on these guys? How much can we assume from a production standpoint? How much is safe to assume based on what we've seen go on elsewhere? It really is a big shrug, to be honest with you. It's a big old shrug, and I think that's what makes it interesting, as I suspect we'll hear from Max. Right. I want to talk to him about guardrails and structure and where is this thing going next. I don't know if anybody knows the answer to any of those questions. And in the absence of true hard facts, we have a lot of innuendo and assumption, and that's what makes it interesting to me. I don't know.
What was the name? I'm going to Google this as I'm talking to you. Do you remember? So there was like Willy Wonka had like that agent, right? Willy Wonka had the agent on the streets,
right,
making sure I'm going to get this absolutely wrong.
Like the smut peddlers in Vegas, right?
Yeah, but I'm saying, but the point of the Willy Wonka one was to like investigate the people getting the golden tickets,
sure.
Right? I just want to know if any school has a particularly good secret agent behind the scenes.
Oh, like okay, I gotcha.
Investigating, making sure this investment is going to work for the collective, whatever. Like, I just want a really juicy story about like after they retire, like, oh yeah, they had not a fixer, I guess, but they had a guy who was just had eyes everywhere and was making sure that, their portal decisions were worthwhile.
I'll tell you who'd be up for that.
Right. Who?
Connor Stallions with a fake mustache
Absolutely.
is 1,000% in for that role if it's
and
out there.
has vacuums if you're interested.
He does have vacuums.
Lightly used vacuums if you're interested. I'm interested by all of the mechanics of this, shady as they may be. So the portal stuff is kind of a bummer more than it's not to me, because I still love the idea of some emotional attachment to players that
I do too.
Commit to your school and contribute and are fun.
I want to talk to Max a little bit about, because Max has been covering college football for a long time. He's one of the finest reporters that are out there in the public sphere. Go and read everything he has to say at ESPN. But I do want to talk to him about, has this had a depressing effect on his fandom, or has it made him more skeptical or cynical with how he covers and just watches the sport? We've been doing this for a long time. And I would say, even though we both love it, there is some element of the emotional appeal of college football that over the course of time comes out in the wash a little bit, just from constant exposure to it. You add something like this in, your faith in retaining players and building a roster from within, and the old school romanticism I think that we used to have with the sport. A lot of that's gone away. I want to know what effect that's had on Max. I have to imagine it has affected him more than it's affected almost, anybody.
Fair enough.
We're going to talk to Max Olson here in a moment. Yes, this is the Solid Verbal. If you've made it this far, hit follow or subscribe. We are a fantastic college football show to listen to on your commute to the office, if that's still a thing that you're doing, as you're walking the pups, as you're doing chores around the house. Doing our best to give you the bang for the buck all throughout the offseason. So hit follow, hit subscribe. If you really want to support what Dan and I do, go on out to our Patreon at verballers.com. That is VERBALLERS.com. You get these episodes a little bit early without the ads. You get access to our Discord, the games that we play. Just be part of our community and help support. You get access
to Ty Hildenbrand up close and personal.
Help support independent podcasting ventures that apparently are not worthy enough to go to the national championship.
Apparently not.
per the college football playoff and the suits over there. Thank you so much for giving us something we can use in our intro.
Yeah.
Without further ado, shall we get to Max?
Let's do it.
All right, Dan, we wanted to do this episode a couple weeks ago. I think we caught Max right in the middle of the busy season, which was poor timing on our behalf.
Yes.
We're making it happen now. Let's talk the portal with our good friend from ESPN, Max Olson. Max, welcome back.
Hey, guys. Thank you for having me back. You caught me at a good time now that portal is finally settled down and I'm no longer deluged with 2,000 young men trying to pick schools.
Has it settled down? It feels like the portal is just constantly going. Is it what does your portal off season, if that's what we're in right now, look like until we get to the spring window?
I think we've hit the portal off season when I don't think I'll have to look at my phone over the course of this podcast and see breaking news happened and say, oh shit. Right. So I think now that we're past that phase, hopefully, grad transfers can still go in between now and April. So that could still pop every now and then. But yeah, for the most part, the top guys are all off the board. They're all enrolling in school. And now I feel like the dust is kind of settled and kind of finally talk competently about the winners and losers and all that.
When does the busy season pick up for you? Because for us, we're covering the games. Obviously, that moment in December hits, a million names go in the portal. That's when we start talking about it. But you're reporting on this. So how soon into the season, how late into the season, what is the timetable for you when you start picking up these crumbs and piecing together who's going to go in, who's not going to go in, who's going to get the big money offers, et cetera, et cetera?
It's a good question because I think this stuff is starting earlier and earlier. And really throughout the month of November, you're having conversations on a daily basis with people either who work on the personnel side, GMs and DPPs, or this year, certainly talking to a lot more agents and just their involvement in the cycle certainly stood out. But yeah, I think a month before the portal opened, I tried to kind of do a preview of hey, here's what it's going to look like. And even at that time, when you talk to personnel people who were looking for quarterbacks, for example, they were already talking at the end of October about, we want John Mateer, we want Darian Mensah, we want Fernando Mendoza. We hope these guys go in the portal. We're talking to the representation. We're trying to figure out who's going to be out there, because I think nowadays, for these recruiting departments, they spend the whole season doing advanced scouting of their opponents' rosters and trying to figure out, okay, we need a tight end next year. Who are all the tight ends that are going to have eligibility remaining? And what kind of money should we be throwing at them? I mean, it's just a daily conversation now for these departments. It's not just sort of like, all right, December 9th's here. Wait and see. We'll see who pops up, and let's try and call them as soon as we can. The fact that you can now just talk directly to agents, and the agents are telling these schools, like, I'm going to represent these guys. We think they're probably going in the portal. How much would you pay them? Like, that's what it is now. It's a lot of conversations well before that name shows up. And then certainly when it hits that first week in December, it's like over 1,000 names just popping up every minute. And so it's pretty relentless.
Is it now fair? And I don't know when like that moment is where a guy goes from being a question mark to legitimately good. If a player is legitimately good at a school that is not considered to be a power conference power, is the likelihood almost past 50% that they're entering when it's clear, whether it's early October, mid-October? You mentioned the name John Mateer and Darian Mensah, where it's just like, I remember looking at just quarterback stats in the middle of October, late October, like, oh, these guys are among like the best dozen quarterbacks in terms of pass efficiency against, different strengths of schedule. But like, it doesn't seem viable for any of those places. And I say that, and it sounds like I'm being derisive, but that's not my intention. To keep a legit star, is it past 50%, 60%? Where is your like assumption needle when somebody proves to be like, oh, this guy's legit?
Yeah, I think that's just how it is now. I think that these personnel departments, they're all using PFF, so they all see when guys rise up in terms of like the national position ratings and stuff like that, and they are breaking down film as early as possible in these guys. I've talked to some players that like left G5 schools and went in the portal this offseason, who are like, yeah, coaches started following me on Twitter during the season. That kind of tells you that they know who I am and there's some intrigue there, but they can't reach out directly and say, hey, come to Oregon. It's more of that kind of that distanced flirting until those guys get agents or you find out who their agent is. And yeah, I think that's just like, I think in this cycle, you kind of can't talk about it without just talking about the money first, because that's just how this one played out. And as we transition into rev share, when you talk to GMs that were sort of planning for this portal cycle, they'd say, man, we're planning to have 14 million or 15 million bucks for the roster for next season. Some school, like if you're in like the Big 12 and the ACC, you're like, man, we're hoping to get to 10 to 14. Like we're hoping to get somewhere in that range. I think for the Big 10 and SEC schools, it was kind of automatic. And when you talk to the GMs at, G5 schools, they're like, man, I'd love to get $1 million. That'd be great if we could put together $1 million or $2 million, and hopefully our wide receiver, we can throw $50,000 at him. If he goes in the portal, he's going to get offered $500,000. So it's just it just doesn't make sense for these kids, unfortunately, to kind of stay put. I mean, and that you can't really fault at this point. Like, it's not about loyalty and stuff like that. It's like it's just not even close in terms of the offers they're going to get on the open market. Now, it doesn't mean that that's always going to be the best move for them. Sometimes guys should stay put and keep producing, and you're going to get invited to the combine and all that. Like, you can stay on that path to the NFL. But right now, I just think there's so much pressure on these players at G5 or at kind of lower level P5 schools of like, okay, you did it, you produced. Now you need to go cash in.
If a GM, if a coach finds out about a player entering the portal via either having the open portal document or whatever spreadsheet, or finding out on social media, is it already too late?
Increasingly, yes. Yeah, I think I mean, there's certainly still an element of let's evaluate who's out there and, kind of try to find the needle in the haystack. And, certainly there are a ton of FCS players that go in the portal and end up, over 100 of them are going to move on to Power 4 schools this offseason. So there's still an evaluation piece that has to happen after the portal entry happens. But yeah, I think a lot of cases, we got a deal done to get him in the portal, and a lot of times too, it's like, oh, they're going to go take this official visit to this school. Okay, well, they've already discussed the terms of what the deal is going to be before that kid showed up on campus. And the visit is just sort of like, all right, let's confirm I'm happy with this situation. But a lot of times, you're not seeing these guys take 5 visits and hold a hat ceremony anymore, right? It's pretty quick and easy for these players. And, when Carson Beck goes in the portal, he knows where he's going, and that thing could be done in 48 hours, right? So I think that a lot of cases, that the conversation, and you could call it tampering, but they don't really have to tamper anymore, because you can just deal with a third party and say, hey, we're interested in this guy, we have a spot for him, here's how much we could pay him, and that information gets back to the player and certainly influences if they're going to go in the portal.
Who are this year's maybe he will, maybe he won't? Obviously, Carson Beck's situation was unique because of his injury, because obviously his draft stock seemed to have taken a hit this year with some underwhelming performances, or maybe Georgia's overall offense was underwhelming. Who were the 50-50, this is a late decision? This wasn't oh, he was pretty sure he was going to enter in early November or something like that. Who were those oh, didn't see this coming, but because of how the last 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks ended up, he's in? Who are some of those names?
I mean, it's hard to think of one that's as prominent as Beck. I think right. For Carson Beck, really just identical to Cam Ward way it went a year ago in a lot of ways. You were hearing rumors before the Pop-Tarts Bowl. You were starting to hear people kind of connect the dots and say, Miami hasn't taken one. He's got obviously got the Cavender connection to Miami.
Right, his girlfriend.
Are we sure with the elbow injury? Are we sure he's going to go pro? And Carson Beck kind of dispelled that by declaring for the draft. But I think we know that you put that out there, but that doesn't fully close the door anymore. And so, I think for him, the move makes a lot of sense. I'm sure you guys have broken it down already, but when you can't when you don't know how much you're going to be able to go through the draft process, how do you guarantee you're going to be QB3 in this draft? So I think the upside there is crazy. I think in especially with the quarterback market in November, you would hear a lot of names of players that schools were interested in. You heard some buzz around guys like Dylan Raiola or Avery Johnson, which is a little bit more of there's interest in them. Are they going to go in the portal? And they weren't, right?
And how much is that sort of floating for leverage from their own camp?
For sure. Yeah. That's always a possibility between the agents and reps and families and stuff of maybe they want the name out there a little bit and they kind of want to see what they can make. I don't think those guys were ever that close to going in the portal. Kyron Drones of Virginia Tech, they were able to re-sign him. You kind of heard some ties from him to Miami early on that was not the move for him. I think in a lot of cases, especially Big 12 is a league that has a lot of quarterbacks returning this year. And those schools, they were not going to let those guys hit the portal. And so, they were able to lock them up for deals that kind of range between 1 million and 1.5. That's just kind of the price of retaining your starter and keeping them out of the portal. And I'm not saying there's a ton of position players that are going to kind of fetch that money to keep them out of the portal, but I think certainly the retention piece and these schools knowing we have more money to deal with and we can deal directly with the athlete. I think that definitely influenced. Let's have these conversations really early and not just kind of wait and see what happens when the window opens.
Max, the big rumor was $8 million for Quinn Ewers to stay in school and maybe transfer elsewhere. Is there any validity?
That's Max Olson money, by the way.
Yeah, that's Max Olson money. Is there any validity to that? Can you share the team? What do you know about that whole circumstance?
I have no doubt that Miami probably investigated the Quinn Ewers situation while they were also investigating the Carson Beck situation, and at least trying to find out, hey, what would it take? I don't think from Quinn Ewers' side there was any flirting. There was any. Let me think about this. I think Quinn Ewers. Maybe this is an underrated thing nowadays because so many guys are extending their eligibility. Quinn Ewers is ready to go pro. I think he was ready to be done playing college football. He was ready to be done at Texas. I think when they won that game against Arizona State, you could tell there was just a sense of relief for him of okay, I've achieved a lot here. I'm proud of my legacy here. I think to win a Big 12 title, to get them to the SEC championship. I don't think there was a part of Quinn Ewers that was let's see what happens here if I throw my name out there. And then obviously they're in the middle of the playoff run too. So I don't think there was ever a time when it was like leaning towards Quinn Ewers is going to be back in college football. If he were to come back, like, yeah, I probably don't think he'd be at Texas, right? I mean, I think that's there's a clear succession plan there that everybody has been sort of working on that you thought was going to be for a year and it ended up being for 2 years. So Quinn Ewers could have made a ton of money. I don't think that he was really looking to stay in college. And I imagine with the way this draft is shaking out, I would imagine he feels like he does have a chance to be the third quarterback taken and maybe play his way into the first round. And obviously, last few years, there's been a lot of guys that go into the draft that you surprised you in terms of them becoming first rounders. So I would think he'll be a top 50 pick. And I imagine that's he's pretty content with the way that all played out.
Okay. I will accept that answer. I do have another question kind of along the same lines, though. You know, so much of the reporting with respect to transfer portal news is about teams going out after other teams' players. But there is now almost a cottage industry related to recruiting your own players. We've heard numerous coaches talk about this. That is ever important to just keep your roster intact. To what degree does this aspect of it, I guess, affect your love for college football? Right? Because there is, I think, a bit of cynicism now that comes with where we're at in the sport, with this constant push-pull of needing to recruit other guys to come in and make the roster better, at the same time not losing what you have. What do coaches say to you? What do personnel guys say to you about that whole process and how it affects their love for the sport as well?
I think this is like, it's an exciting beat to cover. And when things are going on in December, it is pretty fast paced and action packed and all that stuff. And it can seem exciting. Sometimes you do have to take a step back in my role and be like, wait, do people like that this is going on? Like,
exactly.
Who is this for?
Do people buy jerseys and what do they do with those jerseys now? Like, I mean, it's like, I definitely understand, especially when you've had just like decades of people obsessively covering and following recruiting and being like, all right, this guy's going to be here for 4 years. And like, when they're junior, senior, like we're going to go win a national championship and all that stuff. Like when you have kind of that belief that you're going to have a long-term investment in a player and then it's all just year to year now. Like I definitely understand that frustration. I've received a bunch of phone calls in December and January from DPPs and GMs who are venting about things that they are dealing with. And that's not just, I mean, they know that like everybody else is dealing with it too.
What are they dealing with specifically?
I mean, I think this was an offseason where I don't know that the fans would maybe necessarily fully understand this yet, but where it is more pro style in the sense of like, okay, we've got 3 running backs. I don't know if we can afford to bring back all 3 running backs next year. Right. We'd love to. We like them. But we're going to prioritize re-signing this guy. And then our number 2 running back is going to be able to make more money if he goes somewhere else. So we're not pushing him out, but we're not going to offer him as much as he could make on the market. And hopefully he stays, but he's probably not going to stay. Like, I think there was just more of that, just the kind of cap management dynamics are way more in play now. It's not kind of just impulsive spending. I think everybody's trying to figure out like how to make this work under a 20, the 14 to 15 million under the 20.5 under a deal that hasn't even really officially been approved yet. So I think there's a lot of like moving parts to that piece. I think there's also just on the staff side, you are dealing with even at the contenders, even at the playoff teams who are like, look, our guys are going to stay because they want to become starters and they want to become early draft picks and all that kind of stuff. I think they kind of feel like they're experiencing price gouging, even just for their backups and their young guys of like, right. Okay, this guy, redshirted this year, he was a redshirt freshman this year. He played a little bit. He's going to have a good role next year. So why is his agent calling me and saying, we got to get him to 400 to 600? Like, what are we doing here? Right. I think there's just a lot of like, because there's 134 schools out there and there's 60 other, or 70 other Power 4 schools that theoretically could offer your guy more money. They're constantly going to be asked to pay them more. And so I think that the competitive nature of that, there's definitely some challenges that come with that. And then you even talk to Lane Kiffin and some of the guys that are very good at this. I think there's still a lot of frustration about why are there 2 free agency periods? Why are we doing this again in the spring? I feel like I'm just getting this guy for 6 months and then we're going to go through this mess all over again in April. And so someday will there be, when we say deals, will we mean these are deals that keep them on campus for multiple years? Like you can put that in writing now with your conference deals you're doing with them and stuff, but I think people still understand we're going to have more headaches again in the spring.
You mentioned the headaches, and perfect segue for me because, again, from afar, we're not working the portal beat, Max. From afar, it feels like there are no guardrails on this thing whatsoever. As Dan often mentions on the show, scaffolding on top of scaffolding, not just for college football, but certainly for the transfer portal. Is that an accurate depiction of this thing? Have there been guardrails built over the last couple years to maybe keep this thing a little bit more curtailed? Is that not the case? How would you represent this to people who aren't as in the weeds as you?
I think that the way that the game is played now with transfer recruiting is very different than it was 2 or 3 years ago. And I think a big piece of that is just there is presently no fear of enforcement. I mean, the NCAA is straight up, they had to pause all of it. Right. Yeah, we would love to look into third-party involvement in transfer recruiting and pay-for-play recruiting, all that stuff. They cannot. I mean, they just straight up cannot. And so in the past, you were, you had to be careful and you had to, have collectives pop up as kind of that intermediary to have the conversations and work out the financial element of it. That's not the case now. Right now, it is we're going to do whatever we want, and we're not going to really live in fear of anybody cracking down on this. And so when you talk to players and just what their portal experience was, it's now yeah, this head coach texted me and said, we will give you $700,000. And then this, assistant coach texted me and said, we will give you $900,000 and a Lamborghini and all this. It's just straight up the money comes first now. And I'm not saying that the player doesn't automatically go to the school that offered the most money. I mean, there's still an element of fit and role and can I see myself being successful here and all that. But I mean, there's no fear of the police catching you speeding anymore. And so you can have these dealings directly with the agent, and it's just, I'm not saying this is the case for every player because some players are not worth this kind of action, but for the top guys out there, it's just kind of a straight up bidding war now. And you talk to some GMs that are doing this now, when that's the case now, if you get the guy on campus for the official visit, I think you're going to approach this from, look, we're not going to let you go on any other official visits. What is it going to take to get this done? And we are going to, make you an offer you can't refuse to get this thing to get you signed now. And so I think that's kind of it increases the pressure of if you got a chance to get somebody, you're going to pay whatever it takes to get them. And so, it's just, it's more competitive than ever before because there's more money dumped into the market than ever before. And there's not really any rules that people are trying to tiptoe around now about this being anything other than, just straight up pay for play.
By the way, am I the only one of us three who is still uncomfortable using the term GM as much as we've been using it for college football? I'm still getting used to this. It used to be a pro thing. Now it's here.
Well, some schools don't even USC just hired a GM.
They just hired one, right? Yeah. Everybody has to get in this game now. I'm still getting caught up.
It's true. And I think that talking to some of them, I think part of it is that they are the person who is directly dealing with the wild, interesting world of agents. I think that part of it is just right. Hey, let's have them be the contact. We don't want the head coach to be fielding those phone calls.
Which sounds like the worst job in the world, by the way.
Well, I mean, you could see why the guys out there who are doing it at the highest level, like Courtney Morgan in Alabama, Brandon Harris at Texas, James Blanchard at Texas Tech, the salary and the price for those guys is going up because, and you mentioned Chad going to USC, those guys do a lot. And part of that is the classic, old school direct recruiting. And part of that is running an increasingly complicated operation especially now that you are shifting some of the collective responsibility in terms of managing the money over to the personnel department and the head coach. And so, but you can't just do this by the seat of your pants and just, I want this guy. I don't care. Let's pay him. You have to have some element of responsibility to it. And so, yeah, I think the GM role, this is easy to say as you see these guys, their salary go up. Like, those guys probably should be making coordinator money and not tight ends coach money. I mean, it's a very involved and complex job nowadays.
When you look at the portal team rankings from whatever site you want to choose, it seems to be like it's kind of the usual suspects. It's those schools who, like you mentioned, like they're not going to let a prospective portal guy get off campus without a deal. It's Miami, it's Oregon, LSU, Ohio State's up there, Alabama. There is one school, I think in whatever top 5, top 10, that, and this happens every year, there's a school that's like, oh, let's find a bunch of money this year. We feel good. That school this year is Texas Tech. Texas Tech coming off of an okay season, a pretty good year. They did beat, I think, both teams that played in the Big 12 championship game. So there's that level of encouragement going into 2025. But they haven't recruited like this in the portal before to this degree. What's behind this, the Lubbock surge this season?
So Texas Tech is trying to do an Ole Miss, but they're trying to do it in the Big 12, where they think that you have a higher chance of that paying off. Because I think if you do the all-in shove that Ole Miss did a year ago, like, they built probably one of the best D-lines in the country, right? They surrounded Jackson Dart with playmakers and a veteran offensive line and everything. The challenge is you still go line up with LSU and you go line up with Georgia and all these schools, and you're like, okay, now we've like caught up to them, but we're not like far superior to them when we line up with them. And so Texas Tech is sort of trying to replicate that, but in a Big 12 where you feel like if we're the only school that's really spending a lot of money, we feel like we're going to be in the Big 12 championship. And so this is an all-in shove for them. They like what they have coming back. They like Baron Morton. They won 8 games this year and made some good progress. But, I think that there is Texas Tech has never been to a Big 12 championship game. They have not won an outright conference championship at their school since 1955. So, I mean, there is a lot of hunger for like, we got to put this together. There's a lot of belief in Joey McGuire, but it's time to like take that next step. And so, Cody Campbell, their billionaire guy that runs their collective, their big donor, looked at this and said, there's an opportunity with the rev share coming, starting in July, where from July on, there's a cap and where this is going to be tracked and there's going to be, more accounting in this stuff.
Right.
So let's go make a big spend for the spring and do front loaded deals so that we can kind of outspend our competition and get these guys in on deals that pay a pretty real money from now through June. And they went out and they built their board of who they wanted, and they went out and got like the top guy on their board, like kind of across the board. They got Howard Sampson from North Carolina, who people view as like a potential early round pick at tackle. They really rebuilt their offensive line. Reggie Virgil from Miami, Ohio, Quentin Joyner, the running back from USC, one of the best tight ends in the country, Terrence Carter from Louisiana, Lee Hunter, the defensive tackle from UCF. Like, these are not household names. These are not, all Americans, but these are guys that have real NFL potential and can be all Big 12 caliber players. And they're able to go out and get all of them. And so, they spent more than $10 million on their portal class. And I have a story on this class coming out on Friday. It's a lot of money. So in this day and age, that's still a lot of money. And it's a real all-in shove that they believe, they think they've got the most talented roster in the Big 12 now, and that they should be in the playoff next year. So you certainly setting extremely high expectations in Lubbock that this team's going to be a real factor.
There are a few different types of players that enter the portal that will get fans excited. You've got your proven guys who have produced and developed, and as you mentioned, have NFL potential. There are guys who were former blue chip recruits who, for whatever reason, didn't mesh with the team, but you can still, right or wrong, talk yourself into the potential because, like, hey, they were so highly thought of coming out of high school, and maybe they just got buried on a depth chart at this big place. Sometimes there are guys who are just sort of toolsy and measurables guys that like, oh, he's huge, he's going to be an anchor on our defensive line, but like hasn't done anything, hasn't produced anything, and hasn't been like a true game changer. And then there's the small school guys who are like, look at all this production at Youngstown State, at Rhode Island or whatever. They, caught 2,000 yards worth of passes last year, but it was against whatever, the CAA. Who has a class this year that is the most in terms of rock solid, like these are dudes who have proven themselves, have produced, and like this team is getting like proven quality more so than other classes at or near the top?
Yeah, I would say the one that stands out, we did a ranking of the top 75 players in the transfer portal during this cycle. LSU's got a lot of guys that are high on that list. I think LSU did a really impressive job. And, a year ago, they brought in Austin Thomas and they kind of rebuilt their recruiting staff a little bit. But they did not, in replacing Jaden Daniels and Blake Neighbors and Brian Thomas and all the guys at Austin NFL, they didn't really make a big shove in terms of portal pickups. They did this year. I think that they knew with Garrett Nussmeier coming back, Harold Perkins coming back, and obviously just a season that was not up to their standards for sure. And you could see the frustration from Brian Kelly throughout the year that they were going to go all in with this cycle. So some really impressive wins. I think Barry Brown and Nick Anderson at wide receiver, two of the best out there. I think obviously Barry Brown, we've seen he's one of the fastest receivers in the country and a true all-purpose playmaker. Nick Anderson missed the season with injury basically, but is one of the freakier wide receivers out there. I think they did a really good job on the offensive line. I think they did a really good job at DB, and they added a lot to the D line too. And so it's hard to Texas Tech did a really impressive job. I think you could definitely still make a pretty strong argument that LSU had the number one portal class just in terms of these are proven players that they were competing with a lot of other people for. And there's star players and there's also depth to it too. So I think that's the one. I'm not saying that automatically, catapults LSU into their playoff team, but that's certainly their ambition.
Are there any schools that you take and say okay, this is a lesson in how to do the portal over these last couple years, and this is a lesson in how to not do the portal, that teams built in a way that actually haven't helped that team's roster and that team's the next 1, 2, 3 years of the program, and teams where they're just they figured out where to spend money, they figured out the types of players they wanted, and the results have been there? Who are your role models and your cautionary tales in terms of portal activity?
Well, I mean, when everyone's just, you talk to, they just point to Florida State as the cautionary tale now, which is crazy because a year ago you would say they're the king. I mean, who's done it better than Mike Norvell in terms of the player, the Jared Verses of the world that they were able to go find and develop, and Keon Coleman and just all the NFL studs that they had. But I think what they went through last year, if you need all those guys to hit and they don't, then you're kind of shit out of luck. I mean, that's just kind of how it is nowadays. Because if you go heavy on portal every year, your backups are going to transfer out, and then whoever's left is okay, are they good enough to maintain us playing at an ACC contender level? In that case, last year it wasn't. Obviously, you miss a quarterback, and that makes it so much tougher. But I think that was kind of a challenge across the board. There wasn't a lot of spots at Florida State where you'd say they're playing at a all ACC level. So that's the cautionary tale. But I think they did a good job again this year in terms of who they what they're bringing in. And again, we'll see at quarterback if Thomas Castellanos can be everything they hope. But solid job in terms of you had to go back to the portal and replace these guys. You just kind of get on that hamster wheel of we have to do this again next year. I think in terms of the ones that really impress you, Arizona State is one that just nobody talked about when they were getting the guys. And then 2 years later, you're whoa, the batting average on what Kenny Dillingham and his staff did going into their first year, where you talked to Kenny Dillingham about what that was like. It's we had to recruit a huge portal class just to field a team for 2023 because and then as you go through the season and you get decimated by injuries, you have no chance of contending. But certainly nobody was talking about Cam Scadaboo when he went in the portal coming out of Sacramento State. And I'm sure there's a ton of teams that would throw way more money at him now, knowing what they know now. But they were able to recruit. You looked at the time and say, okay, they're just taking like a lot of depth guys, and maybe there's not a bunch of stars coming in here. But they knew, like, we're going to take guys that have multiple years of eligibility, and we're going to develop them, and we're going to set a culture with them. And just the number of guys that they brought in via the portal who were starting for them during that playoff run is crazy. And then again, a year ago, Sam Leavitt was not on the radar of like, here's one of the top 20 quarterbacks who are in the portal.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he didn't have that much tape coming out of his 1 year at Michigan State, in being kind of in a 3-man situation there. And it's still, there's a huge piece of this that is still relationships and evaluation and having information that other people don't have. And so I think that you have to look at Arizona State, and obviously Kenny Dillingham learned a lot from Mike Norvell in terms of how to recruit the portal. But they certainly struck gold in terms of the way they approached it as a team that did not have millions and millions of dollars to invest. They were able to kind of moneyball it, and you have to tip your cap on it to that.
A position group that doesn't get, I think, a ton of attention, and I think it's because you don't see a lot of star power from this position group enter the portal, is offensive line. That teams, it seems, from the outside, can solidify a position. They can find a left guard who is competent because there's a glaring hole there or something. But in terms of star power in the sport, you don't see huge left tackles, huge centers, all that often. It happens, but not super often. What is behind that? And is this a position group that is like secretly demanding more money because of the scarcity of potential star power? What is it about the offensive line that it seems that like you can't drastically improve in the way that you can at receiver, at defensive line, in the secondary? What is it about the, what do we call them? The hog mollies up front. What is it about that group?
I think in a lot of cases when you're recruiting offensive linemen, you're just looking for solid like that. Right. We want experience. Can we get a guy that started 20 to 30 games whose size is good enough that maybe, especially if you're like, trying to get a guy to go from G5 to P4, like you're just hoping for good enough. I think that's usually the case. And certainly from a retention standpoint, those guys are worth a lot. When you do have like a high potential offensive tackle hit the market, those guys are worth $1 million in the view of GMs now. And I'm not saying that there's a ton of offensive linemen out there that are making that kind of money. But the few that do hit the market, I mean, the demand is crazy, and you've got to kind of, you get your pick of school basically. And so, I think one thing that you also see now is like, and I think offensive line is just a tough position to evaluate at a high school to patiently develop. And I think there's maybe just not a ton of patience anymore for that. You want to just go get a guy that, hey, we know he can play. Here's tape of him playing against college guys. We love what he put on tape against a good opponent. And so if you've got size and a pulse and you've got, a bunch of PFF tape, then, jackpot. But, I think that it's just kind of hard to go find a guy that's special. And I think that where this is really kind of the personnel departments that like want to compete at the highest level for portal guys, what they're looking at are, okay, who are the guys that would be like a 6th or 7th rounder if they went pro, but they're going to come back to college for another year. Like those guys are like what everybody is looking for. And you might say like, well, that doesn't sound like very ambitious. What don't you want like, first round guys, but like those guys just don't become available. So you were looking for experience and some validation that the NFL like would draft this guy. If a player kind of checks those boxes, they're worth a ton of money.
Is anybody talking about return on investment? Not to get all businessy with this, but Ohio State spent $20 million on a portal roster or just a roster in general.
No, it wasn't a portal roster. It was just the roster.
Just a roster in general, right?
Yeah.
Certainly portal included in that, but won a national championship, right? Some would argue, some have argued that that's a deal. Some of these dollar figures that you're throwing around, Max, it's a lot of money for places that typically we haven't talked about them spending. Texas Tech spending however much to compile their roster. What is like the value proposition for some of these places? Is there a goal of simply reaching the playoff, winning a championship to validate the spend? How do they view this whole endeavor in terms of, yes, it was worth it. No, it wasn't.
I don't think it's ever crossed their mind. No, it's a great question. I mean, it really is, because especially like as this just drifts further and further into free agency and the price goes up, at some point you have to be like, okay, well, we want a defensive lineman, but here's how much we're willing to pay. And some, I think you saw like last spring, there was a run on defensive tackles because there was just a ton of teams that needed one. And obviously, like as Dan can attest, like a Derek Harmon, worth a lot if you can get him, Yeah. Some of those guys made a massive difference.
First round pick potentially. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. And those guys are like, worth a lot, but there's also some teams that like, well, yeah, we need a defensive tackle, but like, I'm not trying to pay that kind of money. Like that's crazy. We can get by. I think that there's like over time, like there's going to be more and more people that get burned who just say like, okay, well, that was regrettable. Maybe we'll rethink that next time.
Right.
But I think that once you get into December and all these guys are out there for the taking, it kind of just becomes like a competitive thing of just like, okay, well, I want him and I don't want my team that I play in our conference to have him. So let's get it done. And, hopefully that works out. Or hopefully the guys behind them compete with them and get a lot better. Now there's absolutely going to be cases where, wow, we spent a ton of money on this guy, but then our redshirt freshman tackle turned out to be really good, and then we didn't really need this guy, and that was like kind of a huge waste of money. And you could say in some ways you say like, okay, well, that's better depth. I guess that's a good development. But yeah, there's going to be a ton of wasted money. And I think now that we shift from this being on the books of the collective and of, donors, contributing to this. And I think obviously we reached a point where there was a lot of strain for them of just like, this is a lot of money I'm having to spend in addition to all the other money I'm dealing with the school.
Yeah.
When you kind of shift that over to the school, and if we actually are like getting into a world where, deals over $600 have to be reported and there's like potentially more transparency to this stuff, I think you're going to find there's a lot of overspending going on players who, did they actually start 12 games for you this year, or did they not really play at the level that you thought they would just based off the tape you watch? I think that's still a guessing game and a very expensive one.
I mean,
sorry, go Ty.
From afar, this is screaming for some kind of salary cap or screaming for some sort of regulation that can keep this thing in check. You talk to personnel people all the time, Max. What is it that they want this portal to turn into to maybe put some additional guardrails up around it?
I think,
or do they not want that? Some places might not want that at all.
I think right now everybody's just sort of trying to keep up day to day with, in the middle of this portal cycle, all of a sudden Diego Pavia gets his injunction, and now you just like drop all these extra JUCO players into the market. It's sort of like everyone's just sort of trying to keep up with the day to day of like, will this settlement be approved, and will we be ready for July? And it's like there's just so much on these guys' plate that, and I think there's obviously so much frustration about inaction from the NCAA or the slow pace of evolution, that you kind of don't really spend as much time sitting around concocting solutions to all this stuff. It's just sort of trying to survive and thrive. And so, yeah, I think that right now everybody is like, just would like to have more money. It's not like
fair.
That's
fair.
Not that we want to, we don't really know how to limit this stuff. And then also like when you say, the school's going to have a cap of 20.5 million. I mean, people look at that stuff and say, okay, well, that'll get challenged in a court and we're going to probably strike that down, right? Or raise that or whatever.
Right.
And so I think that it's hard to say like, okay, I definitely know how this is going to go next year, because it's just constantly changing. And the fact that, somebody can file a lawsuit and then that undoes that rule like that, and then obviously, that there's down the road, we're going to have the conversation about collective bargaining and all those things. Like, I think in a lot of ways, coaches probably would like to live in a world where it is more like the NFL, where it is structure, it is contracts for multiple years, and players are required to play that out and stuff like that. But we're all just sort of living in the interim period of we don't know how to set that up.
We're a couple of weeks out from Valentine's Day, And obviously, we know it's not just about finding the best, it's about finding the best match. And so I'm a romantic, Ty. What can I say?
Of course you are.
I want to know, because we've seen great matches, like the portal has been great for entertainment in a number of instances where like this player fits this kind of system, ended up at this school. It's Michael Penix at Washington. It's Caleb Downs at Ohio State, right? It's star power entering the portal, finding the place that fits them really well. In this year's class, and it doesn't have to be like the top guys, but in terms of guys who have transferred, who stands out as like, this player is this kind of player. He's going to play for this coordinator or this head coach, and it just seems so obvious that this is going to work on January 29th as we record this. Who are those matches where you're just like, oh, yeah, that makes sense?
Well, can I just gas you up here real quick, Dan?
Sure, please.
I love what Oregon did in the portal. Like,
oh, here we go. Hold on.
It's
really soaked this
Are we
up.
recording this? Can we stop the recording now?
I haven't asked for team, a player, but if you want to go the whole Oregon class, by all means.
Every single player, I'll break that out. No, I think that there's still something to be said for quality over quantity with this stuff, because there are just, there's so many teams out there that, man, we got to take 20 this year. We got to take 25. We just lost 25 guys to the portal, so we got to take a lot. Oregon did not need to take a lot. But they took Mekhi Hughes from Tulane, which is crazy. And certainly when you look at the guys that I think he was 9th or 10th in the country in rushing, and all the guys ahead of him are going to the draft. So a real case to be made that he's the best returning running back in the country, or one of the best. And that just adding that asset for Oregon's backfield is a big deal. I love what they picked up in Dylan Thieneman too at safety from Purdue. And I got some grief from some personnel people who are like, you got that safety from Purdue ranked a little bit too high. It's like, I mean, yeah, but he's extremely productive. He's a playmaker. He was the best freshman in the Big Ten last year. Purdue, probably best defensive freshman in the country, and just a really talented player who I think will make them a lot better. In terms of, let me go down the list here a little bit. Like,
please.
I think I'm excited to see what Zachariah Branch can do at Georgia. I think that's a situation where they need the help. I mean, a wide receiver was just a huge glaring need for going into this portal cycle, and you knew they were going to kind of recruit all these guys. And I don't know why Zachariah Branch didn't have like a crazy productive sophomore year at USC, but that's just one of those guys where it's like, okay, you're going into your junior year. They're going to get you the ball a ton. I would just as you saw kind of with ETN and making his move to Georgia, it's like, I think that's a guy that's like probably going to be ready to play his best football and have like a very high usage role. I think, again, not a household name. Indiana just continues to kill it when it comes to recruiting the portal. And you could say a year ago, oh, well, they had all those James Madison guys, so like that's easy. They probably got those guys for cheap and all that. But like, I think what Kurt Cignetti, his staff did again this year was really impressive, and to leverage the momentum and the playoff appearance and all that. And I think Fernando Mendoza is going to have a really big year there. And I know that for those of us who are like, that know ball, you've watched Fernando Mendoza at Cal, that guy can do some things. Yeah. You watch the Miami game or you watch the Stanford game this year, and you saw him play at a super high level or beat Auburn. But I'm excited to see him like get a little bit bigger platform. I think that's a really talented player and leader who can really put it together this year. Just as, again, we weren't talking about Curtis Rourke a year ago, but one of the most impactful transfers in the country. Let's see. There was a lot of wide receiver movement in this cycle. And I think those guys cashed in. I think that another one that, again, not the biggest name, I'm really interested to see what Eric Singleton does at Auburn. And obviously you've got Cam Coleman coming back, one of the best young guys in the country. And they made their big move to get Jackson Arnold. This is a big portal class for Auburn. They really need to hit on this group and be a contender in the SEC this year for Hugh Freeze. But I think Eric Singleton is a guy that I had him ranked as the number one wide receiver because you talk to personnel people. They view him as not the most like well-known name from his time at Georgia Tech, but a guy that has, one of the fastest players in the country, a true track athlete who has a chance to be a first-round type of player if he can really put it all together this year. So excited to see what he can do Yeah, we could. I could probably go down this list for hours. But there's.
Well, let's go, I mean, we can go the other direction though with it, not a negative direction, but like, are there players that, and aside from all of them, that personnel people or coaches are like, look, this guy didn't get a ton of attention. This guy didn't play a ton of snaps, but from what we saw, we're kind of giddy that we got him for the price that we did. Like, we can't believe, not we can't believe, but like, we are extraordinarily thankful that we were able to get this kind of under the radar guy, that they weren't just filling a roster hole, that like maybe that coach recruited that player, maybe, you know, there was some connection, but like, are there any players where like you've heard specifically where just like, he's not a big name at all, but we can't wait to get him in pads?
There's a ton of guys making the move. I mean, it's a record-setting year in terms of G5 players moving up to P4. It's more than 320 of those guys are transferring up. And so I'm excited to see, like, and then of course when they hit the portal, everybody acts like they're the greatest thing ever because and they're just so
they're all
coveted.
Khalil Mack, right? They're all like the G5 star who's just ready to explode. Yeah,
always. But I think there's a lot out there that people are pretty excited about. I think Ahmad Hardy, the running back from Louisiana Monroe, he's going to Missouri. He was a freshman All-American this year, and sometimes you get those guys and it's just like, yep, he shouldn't be playing at this level. That guy's really good. And he's moving up. I think he'll have a chance to be really productive. Chase Sowell, the wide receiver from ECU, he's going to Iowa State. And obviously they're replacing their top two guys. I think that's like a pretty sneaky one. Ethan Onyama, like I should mention Ohio State. Like Ohio State, while they were busy going out and winning a national championship, also got some of the best guys out there. And there weren't a lot of Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs available in the cycle, but they went out and got some of the best at their position. I think Ethan Onyama from Rice is an offensive lineman who comes in and fills a big need for Ohio State. Obviously, they got hit hard by injuries this year and had to move guys around a bunch. And I think that one is going to work out for them. Zach Poiser from Jacksonville State is going to Miami. I think that's a really good young DB. I think you saw just a big run on Washington State players going to the portal. And I think just obviously those guys aren't really G5 players.
Right.
But them moving on, and then obviously Jake Dickert moving on to Wake Forest, like those guys are kind of spread out all over the country. It's funny. That's just how it goes. Like Washington State and Purdue, like all their players become available. And it's like, these guys are incredible. It's like, okay, well, I mean, Purdue was pretty bad last year, but some good pieces, good pieces that are worth more. I think that's just kind of like how the market goes. I think we're all excited to see, I'm sure you guys are buzzing about this too, Mark Gronowski at Iowa. I mean, come on. South Dakota State legend making the move up for his final season of eligibility. Has won multiple national championships at the SCS level. It's certainly an exciting time if you're looking for good quarterback play at Iowa.
I got two left for you, Max, and then we'll wrap. Again, Max Olson from ESPN. I want to circle back to something you said earlier. We were talking about almost this disparity between the power conferences and the money they're spending versus the G5 and those teams and what they have at their disposal. Is there a G5 team in particular that you think is handling circumstances better than their peers, given that disparity?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think so much of it is like, and they all deal with like high attrition or the threat of high attrition,
right?
And they all in turn then have to go recruit the portal a ton, and there's just really a food chain to it of like, all right, well, let's go get some guys that are bouncing back from Power 4 schools. Let's go get guys that are moving up from FCS. Let's just sort of try to string together good evaluations here. And obviously these guys are coming in cheap. It's not really about, hey, we can give you this much money. I think that there are definitely some AAC schools that have some money. I think certainly you've seen that like Memphis is the envy of a lot of these schools, and just in terms of their ability to spend. One that like is always interesting to watch every year is North Texas just always loses their guys.
Yeah.
And then they just go replace them. And then the next guys are really good too. I think Eric Morris has done a really good job of that, of just like, it's tough. Like I talked to him in the middle of the season about Chandler Morris and kind of the resurgence that he was having after, bumpy run at Oklahoma and TCU, and just kind of finally putting it together And when I talked to him, I talked to a GM before I talked to him, who was like, "Oh yeah, I heard somebody was already offering Chandler Morris like $500,000." I'm like, "Oh man!" So just like in October, it's like already, all right, we did it. See ya, And Chandler Morris did transfer to Virginia. I'm not saying that Virginia gave him that kind of money, but as soon as you strike gold there, it's like, okay, well, we just got to expect this guy's bailing. And so North Texas put a lot of guys at Power 4 schools this offseason, and I would trust that once again he'll go out and replace them and find some guys that can continue to produce. They were, I think, one of the top 5 or 10 scoring offenses in the country this year, and I'm sure he'll just plug in the next guy and just live with that. And I think that's just kind of how you have. That's unfortunately how it goes. It's just like, hey, we love these guys. We can't blame them for taking the money, and we're just going to trust our evaluation and our ability to go find the next one.
It's almost like the NFL draft with the huge teams, right? We have this many draft picks. It's G5 schools saying we had this many transfers up to major schools and made this much money. It's weird, but it's a reality.
Yeah.
Final question from me, Max, on a scale of 1 to 10, mindful of the fact that we've got the spring window coming up here. 1 being, let's say, Jaden Rashad is in the portal again. Not very surprising. 10 would be Arch Manning is transferring. Okay, this is different. What level of surprise should we expect, if any, from this upcoming window? Are there any surprises bubbling beneath the surface?
Oh, probably. I would
fair. That's a fair answer.
Look at deep quarterback rooms, Ty. I think that's the first place to look.
Yeah.
I remember I would go on the lower end there. And I remember a year ago when you'd kind of preview it, it's sort of like, okay, will Michigan go out and get a quarterback? I mean, are they just going to move forward with this situation? Is that really the best thing? Same with Auburn. Is Auburn going to get a guy, or do they really believe in Peyton Thorne? The quarterback market just didn't really materialize. And I don't know if that's because everybody's kind of set, and then the ones that aren't just sort of are kind of stubbornly sticking with what they got. Like Jaden Rashad went in the portal. But there really weren't that many big names. I think, Dylan Edwards left Colorado for K-State. That was a good move. Like I said, Derek Harmon and the defensive tackles that made moves, those were impactful. But you're not going to see a lot of I think people like this time will probably be like, will North Carolina go get a quarterback?
Right.
I don't know who that guy would be. They seem to have, especially with Jacoby Criswell moving on, going down to the FCS level, definitely a lot of kind of unclear what's going on with their quarterback situation. Max Johnson coming back from the leg injury. Bryce Baker, the freshman coming in, probably will have a chance to play right away. So you'll see some of those where you're sort of like, are they going to do something? But other than, maybe just kind of teams shoring up those last needs, I don't think it's going to be crazy. And, when you talk to some of these GMs, and we'll see if this is true, I think this is wishful thinking on their part a little bit. But I do think that now that they're setting these deals up and putting this in writing with these guys, you are trying to structure it of like, okay, well, after the April portal window closes, you will get this amount of money. And that's a really good amount of money. So why would you go in the portal? You should stay and collect that and stay with us for the season. And so I think people are going to be a little bit smarter about trying to structure this stuff to discourage them from going to the portal. But obviously last year you saw Louisville lost several of their guys that had just showed up back to the portal, including Tyler Barron. And so there will probably be, Caden Proctor going back to Alabama. That was a big surprise.
Right.
I think you'll still kind of see some of those little random stories because anything's possible. And, like even the situation with Oregon's quarterback going back to Cal after a couple of weeks, those things can happen. I mean, it's never really totally over. If you have a need, you're going to, again, reach out and find out what it takes to go get the guy that makes you better. So I would put the number at like more of a 3 or 4, but you never know.
So basically you're saying the spring is the scene in Dumb and Dumber. So you're saying there's a chance. That's essentially what March 17th is in every single.
I don't think Arch Manning and DJ Lagway and Lenore Sellers and all those guys are transferring. You can't say with any certainty that everyone is content where they are. And I think that's a frustration of these coaches of like, man, I'd love to know who's on our team next year. Can we get to a point where can we make this easier on Phil Steele and just kind of lock this in here?
Poor Phil Steele. He needs to go digital probably at this point because, yeah, that is, I mean, if you're talking about the big sufferers of the portal, one, it's people who grow attached to good players on their teams, especially if they root for G5 or lower level P4 teams. And two, it's people in print media producing things to try and sell all summer in the spring. So good point there. Max Olson, ESPN. You've got a Texas Tech feature about their portal activity coming out as later we speak, later in the week.
Yep.
ESPN.com. Max, thank you very much for all of your time, and hope to have you back soon.
Hey, guys. Always a pleasure. Appreciate it.
All right, Dan, that is Max Olson from ESPN. Please go and check out Max. Go and read his article, as he said, dropping later in the week, talking about all things Texas Tech and how they're building their roster. As he was talking through all of these machinations of the portal, I kept hearkening back to my very first fantasy football league.
Okay.
My very first fantasy football league, my friend Curdy set it up. We had no idea what the scoring should be or could be, how we would track it, and we changed it week to week to the point where I think we got about 5 weeks in, and the ultimate players on every roster were kickers. Everybody had like 5 kickers on their roster. Jason Elam was a monster back in the day.
Yeah.
And I thought of that because it really does feel like we're just making this whole thing up as we go along with this, with the transfer portal.
Of course.
And that definitely brings an element of intrigue. It's also very unsettling that this is now kind of the bedrock for the sport outside of the high school recruiting game, which is probably less meaningful than it used to be. But this here transfer portal and the ability to spend money and bring guys in and constantly be recruiting other rosters as well as your own, this is the game now. And it's like, you could see Max was shrugging with a lot of the questions we asked him because he doesn't know either, and he covers this thing every day.
Right.
It's incredible to me.
I had the question in there about perfect matches that were ahead of Valentine's Day,
right.
And it's not just about being the best; it's about being the best match. Like that, this team runs this system, and like, oh,
sure.
Of course, this is a true nose tackle. This is what they need to run this 3-4 or whatever. You never dated online, right?
I did not.
I did, and it's quite the experience. And I'm sure most of the people listening to this show at this point, if they've been single relatively recently, have done so.
Sure.
There's a lot of overlap between like, okay, well, this person seems super attractive, but I'm not sure, like they're super into that in their description. Like maybe I could get into that. Like there is that talking yourself into like, well, it didn't work out at Eastern Michigan, but I mean, they run a 4.3 laser. So I think I could see this working out for us at corner. And I keep thinking about the swipeization of everything. And there is that in the portal a little bit.
Oh, and there is.
It's kind of fascinating.
Absolutely. And it does, I think, support this conversation today supports a little bit of what you got into with Bruce on the last episode, which was the value of information.
Right.
Information is everything. Max talked about it with Kenny Dillingham. And by hook or by crook, they had really good insight into Cam Scattaboo. They had really good insight into Sam Levitt. These are players who clearly had an immediate impact on that program. Sam Levitt will continue to have an impact on that program moving forward. You hear stories often about teams overvaluing certain players, maybe not having all the information, maybe only seeing them a bit on tape before committing to them. And then you hear stories about like the one we just heard with Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State, where it's clear they've got a good scouting department. They've got insider information to some extent to know who to go after. That is something I suspect we're going to have to hear more about moving forward as every power program, every G5 program builds out its front office. This is where we're at now. You're going to have these guys that are working the streets and, trench coats, getting the manila envelopes in dark corners, deep alleys, finding out inside information on some of these guys that they want to go after next, because this is the game now. As I said at the top, this is the game.
Slugworth is the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Slugworth, okay.
To make sure that the heir to the Willy Wonka fortune and factory has a pure heart. Slugworth. Here's something else from the portal that I've just noticed and I think is interesting and actually like kind of admirable, as we know. And this is sort of in light of the Ryan Day stuff with his family and being harassed and stalked and hiring security and everything, that fans, especially on social media, are prone, and sit down for this, Ty, to acting perhaps irrationally and emotionally about their sport.
What?
Right? That like, how could this guy transfer? Like, is there no loyalty these days? Like,
yeah.
One, I get and relate to all of it. I'm not putting down that fan at all, because that's a really unfortunate part of the sport. But the portal era, and you got to pay attention on social media. You got to pay attention if you're on message boards or wherever people congregate to talk about this sport. There is a new kind of fan that I've noticed popping up, and it's arguably the most admirable sports fan on earth. And I'm going to tell you who that fan is, Ty.
Can I guess?
Please.
Is it the fan of a team whose player is leaving, but they are grateful that the player was on the team and they just want to tweet them and wish them well?
Almost.
Okay.
Almost. It's the fan. Let's say it's a Texas fan. It's generally a fan of a team that recruits really well and is pretty deep. Let's say it's a Texas fan, a Florida fan, a Clemson fan, an Alabama fan, where a backup corner who couldn't quite see the field after a couple of years, wasn't a rotation guy, maybe was a 5-star, but for whatever reason didn't make his way into the rotation, has decided to enter the portal. And let's say this former 5-star Alabama corner ends up at, TCU, at Oklahoma State or something like that. And it's the fan that says, you know what? Have heard good things, and I think there's a lot there. Probably wasn't going to see the field all that much here. Hope he thrives at the new place. Like, fly high, young condor. Oh, spread your wings. Like, hope it works out.
Yeah.
That's sort of the this relationship isn't where, if you love something, set it free. Like, the relationship's run its course, but I hope she's doing well. I hope she's happy. That's the kind of the well-adjusted portal fan, I think, is who we should all thrive to be. And I've seen that fan, lurking on the dark college football web. But I appreciate that those people are out there.
If we made a well-adjusted portal fan t-shirt, would we sell any of them?
At least one. And it would be, the order would be coming from inside the house.
It would be you and I. We would wear them on a show. We'd put a patch on a hat. We'd be proud of it. Yeah. Nobody would buy them.
But I'm telling you, if you look closely enough at Notre Dame, Penn State, who you pay the most attention to.
I know exactly who you're talking about. I've seen it.
You're like, this former 4-star, it just, for whatever reason, wasn't happening here. But good size, supposedly a good kid. Hope he catches on somewhere and, with added playing time, is able to realize his potential.
I saw a number of Penn Staters doing that exact thing with Bo Prabula. Now, the complication was the fact that he left during the playoff.
Yeah.
And they absolutely could have used him in spots as a change of pace. I mean, he was a bigger part of the offense for a backup quarterback.
Right.
But that aside, yes, plenty of Penn Staters. Bo Prabula grew up in Pennsylvania, wanted to go to Penn State, came to Penn State, was a winning quarterback at the high school level. People were high on Bo Prabula, but it was clear there was no path to immediate playing time. So people understood it.
Right.
And I have seen countless accounts out there talking about Bo Prabula, wish him well, wasn't going to work out in the immediate future for him.
There was just not a path there. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see. I don't know. Maybe come back. You could always come back at some point if you really wants to after next season. But
right.
That fan does exist, rare as they may be.
I love that fan. That fan's great. It's an asset to our community, Ty.
I love it. Well, thank you again to Max Olson from ESPN for stopping on by, imparting some of his wisdom on us with respect to the transfer portal. Again, if you made it this far, hit follow, hit subscribe, listen to us wherever you may be, whatever it is you're doing, fit us into your workout or to your drive to grandmother's house, whatever it is. We'll be with you this off season.
Get your steps in.
Get your steps in. Whatever you're into. Whatever you're into. Doesn't matter to us.
To listen to while you get your 10K. It's
Absolutely. Great to have you with us here in this community. We will be back next week talking more things college football. If you do have suggestions for topics that we should unpack a little bit more, you can always hit us up, solidverbal@gmail.com, or you can go on out to verballers.com. We have a $10 tier that we are going to use to help guide us, topically speaking, this off season. So we'll
not
put
like
out,
in terms of like creams and skin, like aloe stuff.
not that type of topical.
Okay.
No, we're not talking about exfoliation.
Yeah.
Nothing like that. But
okay.
we do want to rely on our verballerhood to help guide our topics in this off season. So if you're interested in having a more direct role, you can go out to verballers.com and check that out.
Yes.
I think that's all I got, Dan.
I gotta go make some pizza dough. Yeah.
Thank you for taking over for me while I was absent last episode.
Mm-hmm.
It was a bummer that I missed that conversation with Bruce, but I enjoyed listening back to it as a fan. After the fact, I would encourage everybody to go and do so as well, because Bruce is super smart. One of our favorite guests that we have on.
He remembered your mother's maiden name.
Crazy.
Because it was on his caller ID when we used to connect via your illegal phone coupler way back when. I don't know if the statute of limitations is up on that.
I don't know either.
Used.
It's okay.
Was it industrial, military technology? It was something that should not have been available to you on
It was
eBay.
not. No, the book on that was, I bought it on eBay for $45, and it came with a disclaimer saying that if you buy this, you can't talk about it because it is not FCC approved.
Oh,
At least not in all states. And whatever it was, I think it wasn't just is your state a two-party state or not, which is kind of its own thing, but it was like the tech being used in this was not street legal. And so you can buy it and I can sell it to you, but you can't talk about it. And now I have. So I've been outed.
Yeah. Thai bot, illegal Chinese technology, I assume.
On that note.
Yeah.
Thank you to one and all for downloading, for listening, for supporting with Dan. And I do big thanks to Max Olson for his generous donation of an hour plus talking all things Portal on today's episode. We will catch you all next week. In the meantime, you know the drill. Stay solid.
Peace.